Hello, welcome to Chats with Chelsi. I'm your host, Chelsi Bennett. Today is the finale of season 2, and I am so grateful for my friend Elizabeth Keys, who joins us back this week to close out the season. Last week, she shared her journey, how she's dealt with grief of losing her brother 3 years ago to a heroin overdose. Today, she shares with us how she's overcome the stigmas around sharing how she lost her brother and what's next. Let's tune in. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me again today for another episode of Chats with Chelsi. Last week, we had a very real discussion about your journey since your brother passed away from a heroin overdose 3 years ago. Something that often comes up with an overdose of whatever it may be, but especially with a heroin overdose, it's just a stigma for those who are left behind. How have you dealt with the stigma of his loss?
It is, I do think we as a society are not entirely comfortable with addiction. And, in the news you hear opioid overdose, opioid epidemic, and it's easy to think, oh, that's West Virginia and Kentucky and Florida, and it is in all of those places, and some of those places have been hit especially hard. But it's, and I think my family's evidence of this, that this can affect any family, and all families, and it doesn't, we were a nuclear family with a mom and a dad, and everybody was raised and went to college, and, sort of, that doesn't insulate you from this. But one of the things that's important to me, and I'm not there yet, this is still a work in progress, is speaking the words. If you had somebody in your family who died from cancer or a heart attack, no secret to it. You would just say the person had breast cancer and struggled with that for several years and unfortunately lost her battle, or somebody had a heart attack and peacefully passed in his sleep, or whatever the case may be. Like we use that vocabulary there in a way that we don't with frankly with probably any sort of mental health or brain related cause of death. But I am trying to be more deliberate in using that word overdose, using heroin, because I think the more we normalize, might not be the right word, because I hope we get to a point where we don't have to talk about it at all. But the more that we talk about addiction as a cause of death, not a lack of willpower as a cause of death, not sloppy behavior, or sort of all of these things that are hard for us to separate out from drug use. I just think each individual story, anyone who overdoses, their story is much more nuanced than just drug addict.
I appreciate the analogy you use, because it does cause me to pause and to think that for someone who's died from something that does not have a stigma attached to it, when someone asks, you quickly offer it up. And so I think that it is, obviously, I send my sympathy and I empathize, yet I'll also be curious in a year of how that's even helped you in your grief process by confronting it and not hiding behind the stigma. From those you have shared it with, Elizabeth, has anyone said anything crazy so far?
No, which makes it even which really just makes it even more powerful that a large part of the stigma is on the part of the family of the user. That everyone I've told, and I will admit it's not been, not everyone knows, but then not everyone's asked either. But when the people that I've told, no one has had anything other than, oh, I'm so sorry. No one has said anything ugly, dismissive, so it really is, again, it's sort of trying to bring this into the light and just make that more, make that vocabulary part of our vocabulary around illness and death and dying. And I'm sorry that any of it has to be part of our vocabulary, but that is the reality, that we have people who have diseases or who are in accidents or whatever. We do have these words, and that the more we can make all of those sort of a sad event in a life worth celebrating, and take out the asterisk, you know, that it, again, if it's someone who dies of cancer, oh, he or she lived a full life, and you know, all of the their work accomplishments and their who you know, their family members and sort of all of that, and I feel like you know, that there is some element on an overdose of, you know, asterisk, except that it was a death by an overdose, not a normal reason. And again, I just I think that I, frankly, as a white, educated, professional woman, have a unique platform, might not be the right word, but to make that seem, I mean, for goodness sakes, I was the president of a junior league, you know, that you know, if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone, sort of that, like, I feel like I have I'm uniquely positioned to be able to share that message, and to, in using the word, help, again, sort of normalize that.
And the stigma that you have internally attached to the overdose, in sharing that, and sometimes only sharing if asked how, is that related to your perception of overdose, or because there has been some negative feelings about how your brother died?
You know, I think it's sort of unwrapping all of these cultural norms that have been kind of forced on us, that not every, but you know, you think about movies, TV shows, like the drug user is the loser, is the bad guy in a TV show, is the one who's, you know, robbing the convenience store to get the money to further their habit. And those things do happen sometimes, right? Absolutely. But I just think an individual person's story is always more nuanced than the cultural or the pop cultural take on that. And, you know, so we need not to lose sight of that. I also do think, even though I fully believe, and I think science supports this, that addiction is a disease that is essentially a malfunctioning of your brain chemistry, it is really hard for me, as somebody who is not addicted to drugs or alcohol, really to get a hold of what that means and why the person can't why did he keep doing it if he knew it was bad for him? You know, even though you know, the rational part of your brain knows that, there is still the part of you that is sort of assigning blame or blaming it on willpower or whatever that is. And again, that's sort of undoing all of these, you know, movie references and things you learned in, you know, when they did drug education in elementary school, and it's sort of undoing some of that.
Was that hard for you to undo those perceptions and cultural norms that you believed has been pushed on so many of us in society?
I think I'm still a work in progress on that. And again, it's sort of separating the rational part of me, where, you know, the sort of the book part of my brain that has read fairly extensively on addiction, specifically on opioid, 100% believes, like, the facts show this is a disease. But sort of the more emotional part of your brain, it's just hard to make those two things reconcile. So anyway, so still a work in progress on, and I guess to some extent it's how you can't ever really understand
why.
Right, why, or what somebody else is going through or experiencing if you haven't gone through or experienced the same thing. And believe me, I'm not going to go try this out so I can see for myself. But it's just sort of hard for me to understand exactly how it works, even though I know sort of scientifically how it works. So.
But that's real.
Right.
To be in the grieving process, but to have that that revelation, that moment of honesty, that there is a portion, is, as you shared on last week's episode, about there's always going to be that hole there.
Right.
It's living with that brother-sized hole.
Right.
But that's a part of it, is you're not going to have all the answers.
Nope. I don't even know all the questions to ask, much less all the answers. Yeah.
Well, as I shared, I may be a little different. I may have all the questions. So the stigmas, you're going to be pushing back from within your area of influence and spirit. And I think that, as a former president of a large junior league, you do have that platform. You do have that sphere of influence to help, and I would like to use the words, to break down the stigma. Because there are going to be folks who are still going to have many questions.
Sure.
There's going to be some folks who are not going to read as much, and they're going to lean more to their emotional side.
Absolutely.
So it's breaking it down so that if someone asks how your loved one died, it's, they died 3 years from a drug overdose, from a heroin overdose. And they're not being that your stomach, you feel your stomach dropping to the bottom because of a concern or fear. One of the things that I heard from you, Elizabeth, that I'm sure is not the case for everyone, is that or from what I've heard, or in some ways making an assumption, that there was not this fear that you would be judged based off of his decision.
No, I don't think so. But I do think, too, that I have the luxury of not living in the same community. I had moved to Washington, D.C. I think if you were to ask my sister that question, who lives in the same community and they ran in the same circle of friends, I would guess that she might have a little bit of a different answer. And now, speaking of questions, I'll have to go back and ask her that. But I would guess that she probably has more of the sort of the whispered, oh, that's the girl whose brother died of an overdose, I feel fairly confident in saying that, but I will go back and ask her about that. Yeah. And I think our parents too, and some of this is generational, and some of it is, I don't know, and I do not blame my parents for this even one tiny bit, but I don't know if you're a parent how you don't blame yourself for it at least a little bit. I think that is probably a normal, natural response. I don't think they bear any responsibility for his actions that led to this. But I think they're probably a little bit less comfortable than my sister and I are. They're older. If you feel a little bit of shame or responsibility, or that's a more complicated story also. So we're just all kind of making our own ways. And I do think, and I don't know yet sort of what direction this will take, but I've got some ideas, and I do think that I am called to do something more defined on this. And again, I don't know exactly yet what it is. I've got a couple things that I've sort of been sketching out and mulling over, and but again, trying to use my platform in a way that's positive for me and for other families.
Well, in the midst of us talking about such a sensitive and personal topic, I do smile, because one of the things that I love is seeing women, especially, walking in their purpose and their passions, and what God has called them to do. Because even out of tragedy, God has given you a testimony to be able to help others who may have lost someone. And then, as we're going to wrap up this conversation, be able to help other families whose loved one is addicted, who's addicted and still around. And so we will be watching. Because this is Overdose is something that something you said earlier, Elizabeth. You all grew up in the nuclear family.
Right.
You all went to college. Drugs don't have a name.
Right.
A neighborhood, a zip code,
No.
education status. It can affect any of us at any time. And as I share often when I post about the mother to be celebration, is that life happens.
Yeah.
Because there's stigmas even around expecting moms,
Sure.
single moms, teenage.
Sure.
Life happens.
Yeah.
And I believe that part of what God has called me to do here is, one, to empower women to live purposeful lives, but in that to reach them where they are.
Right.
And so let me ask the question: what's your advice to families who have a loved one who's addicted to drugs? What's your advice to them of being there in the moment, being there with them in this season?
That's right. That's the question, isn't it? And you read some really heartbreaking stories about, especially moms, because as women we tend to be the caregivers, who stick with a child who is stealing from them, or who is sort of all of these things. And I'm incredibly, and it sounds crazy to say lucky, but incredibly lucky that we didn't have anything like that in my experience. And I genuinely don't know how families do this for 5 years, 10 years, 12 years. I don't. The emotional toll that has to, and the financial toll, and all of that is incredible. And I have only things that I can learn from those families. In our particular case, because it really was relatively short-lived, and we talked about it a little bit last episode. I didn't feel like my role or my purpose was to ask a million questions. I felt like my role was just to say, hey, I love you, I'm your big sister, I don't remember life without you, you're important to me. And I did, and this is probably where the practice that I had mentioned last week of writing text to my brother, that was sort of like my version of journaling. After he had gone into rehab, I definitely started texting him more in real life. And so I think that's part of why the text notebook of things that I would have sent him really helped me, that I just wanted to make sure that I was, that at least probably every day or every other day he got something from me. Sometimes it was totally stupid or a bad joke, but just something that he knew that he was on my heart and that I loved him. And I don't know that I have any advice other than it is not, addiction is not the fault of anyone in the family. It is not the fault of the addict. It is a fault of brain chemistry and addictive chemicals and sort of all of those other things that are wrapped up. And so to the extent you can avoid either taking on blame or assigning blame and just focus on the love, that's my advice.
Well, thank you for joining us here on Chats with Chelsi. For those who are interested in following you and waiting for your big reveal of how you're going to use your brother's tragedy as a testimony to empower, educate, and affect other lives, how can they follow you on social media?
So my Instagram and Twitter are @_Elizabeth with a Z, KEYS, just like keys to unlock the door.
Well, I hope that they will, I hope that everyone will go follow you.
Thank you.
Yet that there will be folks who will be truly blessed by your openness and the journey that you'll continue to share.
I hope so.
Thank you for being on Chats with Chelsi.
Thank you for inviting me. Glad to do it.
To Elizabeth and anyone else out there who has lost a loved one to an overdose, you are in my prayers. You're in my prayers this holiday season as you are reminded of your loved one who will not be there at the table or around the Christmas tree. I am praying that the love of God, the peace of God would overwhelm you and your families, and that while there may be a brother, son, dad, uncle, sister size hole in your heart, that God would meet you right where you are and you would experience just that supernatural peace. To those of you who have been along this journey with me for the past 2 seasons, thank you. Today we close out season 2, and I am so grateful for you all being a part of the Chats with Chelsi community. I hope that the content this year was helpful for you. And I ask for your feedback and your suggestions as we prepare for season 3. There's already some amazing things that will be taking place as we come back January 2020, because at the end of the day, my goal is to empower you to live a purposeful life. And so we'll have some great ideas in store, and I'm excited to just be on this journey with you, because it's truly a community. It is truly us living out God's purpose for our lives. And as we close out the year, remember you can continue to donate to our foundation, the LWC Foundation. We help moms throughout the year, so you can head over to lifewithchelsea.com and make a donation. As well as another way you can donate is to shop our boutique. We will be launching a new boutique in the next coming week, but the shirt I have on is still there and available. So be sure you go grab a shirt before the new ones drop. I love you all. I'm so excited to see what God's going to do in your lives in 2020. Have a great rest of the year.